Really excited to be here at the Tuesday group and in Ely. Been spending more time over here in the past year. It's a great community. We're going to talk about the Boundary Waters today, and when I've been doing some of these presentations or talking about the book and the metro, I usually start by asking how many people in attendance have been to the Boundary Waters. Since we're in Ely, it seems a little more obvious that most of us have probably paddled. We're in here, and that's all right if you haven't. But what I am curious about is how many people, just a quick show of hands, have been in a situation on a trip to the Boundary Waters that was dangerous, potentially life-threatening, maybe capsized canoe, weather-related situation. Quick show of hands might fall into that category. Right. So that's what largely started this book for me. I have been a journalist for many years, about 20 years since I graduated from the University of Montana in Missoula in 2005. I then moved to Oregon, where I was a journalist and reporter at newspapers primarily in Bend, Oregon, Central Oregon. At that time, I'd never heard of the Boundary Waters, even though I grew up in Iowa. My family just didn't know about it, didn't introduce me to it. We canoed the rivers of northern Iowa, but I'd never heard of the Boundary Waters till I lived in Oregon. Some friends of mine from Bend said, "We're going to Minnesota on our week-long vacation." Minnesota? We're living in the Cascades, and we've got the ocean, mountains, and all these things we can do here. Well, why are you driving to Minnesota on your one vacation of the year? There's this place, the Boundary Waters. You go from lake to lake, you carry your canoe, and I just could not fathom it. My idea of Minnesota at that time was Twin Cities, Twins fan, Vikings fan. I knew some of that. That was my thought about what Minnesota was. But my friends came back and they were just glowing. "We had the best time. You won't believe how wild it is. We saw moose. The fishing was outstanding. I'm a big angler. It's a thing for me." They were just on and on they went about campsites, and it was a fall trip, and they just loved it. So that planted the seed for me. It was a few years after that, about 4 years later, that I first came to northeastern Minnesota, driving up the North Shore. Then I hit the Gunflint, and it was May, and I wasn't too far past the pines, if you know the Gunflint Trail, when I said, "I'm going to move here, and I'm going to do what it takes to move here." I knew some people like Sean Parrish, who's an outdoor writer, passed away last year, who helped me get started in media here and journalism. Got hired at the radio station in Grand Marais, WTIP, where I worked the past 10 years until this past November, doing local news. I was the news director there. And it was in that space capacity that I started to learn about not just my enjoyment of the Boundary Waters, my enthusiasm, but that things happen to people out here. And sometimes that makes the news, sometimes it doesn't. And it's not something that the Chamber of Commerce or even an outfitter is likely to tell you about. People die in the Boundary Waters, get injured, and it happens much more than we thought. And so I started to get curious about that topic. We've had a lot of weather this year, the Boundary Waters region, Ely, of course. This is the Murrow entry point just 2 weeks ago now. I'm driving over today, Highway 1's closed, taking that detour around. The water has impacted things. It's put people in dangerous situations in the Boundary Waters in some instances. Some of these storms have put people in harm's way. A 9-year-old boy that was injured off of Snipe Lake, off the Gunflint, during some of these storms on the 18th of June when that major weather system moved through. So we're seeing it happen this year, certainly, with some of the situations, weather-related in particular. Echo Trail there on the left was closed. North Arm Road, these entry points closing down. All this news, these things that happens, the weather, how it impacts people's trips. We're going to be talking about that throughout the day, and as you read the book, you'll learn about that. Similar, when I'm down in the cities, I usually have to do a bit of an explainer about what the Boundary Waters is, where it's located. Here, we can just sort of look over there, and we understand where we're talking about. But obviously, the Boundary Waters is the most visited wilderness area in the nation. It's an incredible place. It's my favorite place now in the world. So grateful that I get to live here and share these types of stories and go paddling, as well as winter travel, which is something I really enjoy doing. So I go to the Boundary Waters a lot. Could definitely say that. But what started me out to write this book, last entry point, was one story in particular. So I'd been the news director at the radio station for 8 years at this point when I started writing the book, or when I got the idea of I'm going to do a book about some of these situations. Is that when a news release comes in, when someone dies in the Boundary Waters, comes from St. Louis County, Lake County, Cook County Sheriff's Department, it's always very brief. You get the person's name, their age, a little bit about what happened, if they were wearing a life jacket or not, what lake they were on, who was involved in the recovery, if it's a death. That's what we get. That's what the media gets. So after 8 years of reading these names on the airwaves at WTIP, no context to them, no stories, no emotion, just some basic facts. It was in May 2020 when this gentleman, Billy Cameron, who's in the center with his two friends there, that's on his birthday, 2 days before Billy died, as they were driving from Indiana for their annual May fishing trip to Tuscarora Lake, which is off the Gunflint Trail. The Billy died, and the news came in. It's May 2020. If you think back to that time, COVID, George Floyd had been murdered just days before this photo was taken with Billy. The time was very stressful. The society was a chaotic time just to be alive, to experience, to go through. The radio station had largely closed the doors, certainly entirely to the public. There were only 2 people coming in the building, primarily, and announcing things live on the air. I was one of them. Get this news release from the Cook County Sheriff's Department. Billy Cameron, 29 years old, Noblesville, Indiana, died on Tuscarora Lake. He was wearing his life jacket. Hypothermia, likely the cause. On to the next story. What's happening at the Lutzen Town Hall? What's the Cook County Board of Commissioners do? That quickly, that's how the stories went when you get a news release like that. So after the show, I was live on the air, and sitting in the studio, and I was just troubled by it. Perhaps just because I'd been reading so many of these names. I knew Tuscarora Lake, knew this area, societal tension. For some reason, it just stirred something in me to want to learn more. I needed to. So I started to look into, who is Billy Cameron? Who did I just read about live on the air? 29 years old from Noblesville, Indiana. Who is he? I found Natalie Yaconis' Facebook page. That's Natalie on the right with Billy. They were partners and soon to be engaged, though Natalie didn't know that at the time, that Billy was going to propose after the trip, after his birthday. So I found Natalie. I messaged her on Facebook from the WTIP page. And I said, I'm Joe. I'm the news director here at the radio station in Grand Marais, Minnesota. This is near where Billy did his Boundary Waters trip. And if you'd be willing, I'd like to share some stories about Billy. And you and I could have a conversation if you want to. Almost instantly, I could see someone was typing a response on a text message. Sometimes you can see the person's responding to you. I could see that was happening. It was Natalie, and she said, yes, I want to talk about Billy, and I want to talk about the fact that water's really cold, and that people need to know that who are coming up on their next trip tomorrow. I want to tell people to be safe out there. Great, let's connect. We talked over Zoom for almost an hour, extracted some of the best parts of our conversation, which was very emotional. Billy had died just 2 days before at that point. Basically a day since Natalie had found out. It was an emotional conversation, as you might imagine, for me and for her. And we put it on the air. I aired that the following day. It's a Friday. Busy weekend coming up. People are starting to go outside of their homes now. Quarantine was still in place, but people could leave their homes at this time. Some of the first days of that movement. So I aired this piece with Natalie. It was about 15 minutes, and she talked a lot about cold water. Please be aware, Billy was an extremely experienced canoeist, and I want people to be safe as they're doing these trips. And 3 things happened. 3 types of reactions came in after that piece aired live on the air on WTIP on a Friday. 1, people saying, wow, that was so emotional. That really impacted me. That was a very moving piece. I'm really glad that she came on and shared some of those stories about who this person was that we've been hearing about. 2nd was, how brave Natalie was. That took a lot of courage for her to do that. Just commending her for coming on and sharing some information in this time that she was grieving. And the third was, to a lesser extent, but there was some of it going, how dare you, Joe, infringe on this grieving person to try to get her to talk to you about his death. So three types of reactions. And what that showed me, someone who works in media, is that people were interested in this. Because a lot of the stories that we write or air, you don't hear anything. They're just on to the next story. There's not a human reaction to it. This interview with Natalie had a big reaction. So I became curious. I wanted to learn more. Who are some of the other people that I've been talking about for the past 8 years when they've died in the Boundary Waters? And there are many. We've seen 3 this year already, 2024. 2 at Curtin Falls, 1 on Agnes. How many injuries there have been? Numerous injuries. We don't hear about them all. If you don't follow the scanner and listen to search and rescue, it's amazing how many times they go out of Boundary Waters on any given year. A lot of calls this year. I want to jump back to weather, as we're talking about weather and these storms that we've seen, closing the entry points, the impact on the communities here. Cook, Minnesota, here in Ely, Highway 1, Echo Trail, all around here. What storms mean, wind, weather. One of the people I spoke with for the book, 78-year-old man named Harold Hansen. Scandinavian as they come in Minnesota. A great guy, really enjoyed speaking with him for the book. He made me laugh a lot. And when he turned 78, he wanted to come to the Boundary Waters and hike to the top of Minnesota, Eagle Mountain. It's the highest point of elevation in the States, in the Boundary Waters, off a road called the Grade, near the Caribou Trail up Highway 61 from Lutzen. So Harold comes and he hikes to Eagle Mountain. It's October 2021, and he has a heart attack at the top of Eagle Mountain. And then a tornado comes as he's having this heart attack. And it's this perfect culmination of events and search and rescue deploying, and there's no way that they could get a helicopter or an airplane there to the top of Eagle Mountain. The weather wouldn't allow it. The terrain doesn't allow it. So I'll read just a short part of this from the book where I spoke with Harold about this situation, what he experienced. The Eagle Mountain Trail is lined with birch and conifers. Periodically exposed cedar roots bulge from the earth along the trail. Over the years, trail volunteers and the Forest Service installed narrow stretches of boardwalk that allow hikers to travel over swamps and standing water. Most of the water comes from small creeks plugged by beaver dams. Some people jog on the trail, but most undertake a casual stroll as they make their way to the top of Minnesota. The emergency responders, in their quest to reach Hansen, had to carefully navigate the winding trail. They found him and the others at 4:25 p.m. As they arrived, dark cloud rolled in overhead. Time was of the essence, primarily because Hansen was suffering from what appeared to be a heart attack. The crew worked quickly. As it started to rain, Hansen felt straps coming across his body. He recalls being placed on a stretcher just as the heavy rain and the high winds started. There were no wheels on the stretcher. The emergency responders would have to carry him out. Given the conditions and terrain and the fact they were carrying an elderly male in physical distress down a hiking trail on a stretcher, the miles-long descent back to the ambulance was slow. The weather grew worse. At 5:41 p.m., the rescuers had to stop. They took shelter under a large spruce as the rain turned to hail. Golf ball-sized hailstones fell from a thunderous sky. Dispatch relayed a message over the communication radio that they needed to be ready for a tornado. At 5:44 p.m., a tornado warning was issued. What are the odds, Cook County Sheriff Pat Eliason told me later? They happened to be responding to a search and rescue on that day, at that time in that area, and we have a tornado touchdown. I mean, what are the odds? They're just astronomical. They had to hunker down, and it's like, hopefully we, the search and rescue teams, don't die out here. I even thought about it later, Eliason told me. The next day, we've had one tornado in Cook County in the last 50 years, and it had to be that day, at As the crew and the others hid under the tree to marginally escape the pounding hail and strong wind, Hansen remembers leaning over the side of the stretcher and vomiting. I was so cold, he said, it actually felt kind of good to throw up. Hansen was immobile and freezing as the hail dropped around him. After several minutes, the storm eased as it charged toward the Gunflint Trail and Alder Lake, where it eventually morphed into an EF2 tornado. So that's a situation that happens in the Boundary Waters. And in talking with some of the search and rescue crews from last week and 2 weeks ago now, it's been on Snipe Lake where the 9-year-old boy was hit by a falling tree at his campsite. That they had similar conditions. Search and rescue had to get in the storm. They don't wait for the storm to end when a distress call comes in. They go out into the storm. Search and rescue teams are volunteers primarily. They hear the call, 9-year-old hit, in we go. Harold Hansen, 78-year-old male on the top of Eagle Mountain. Here we go, tornadoes on the way. Well, that's the condition. Let's go get him. It's incredible what the search and rescue units do in and around the Boundary Waters, from Ely, Lake County, over to the Gunflint and the east side of the wilderness. Here's another person who I learned a lot about writing last entry point. His name is Jordan Grider. You might recognize that name. He died here near Ely, off the Sioux Hustler Trail. Jordan Grider was eaten by wolves in the Boundary Waters. It is believed that he injured himself first, bled out, and then was eaten by wolves. His mother, Rebecca, who I met in New Mexico, where Jordan's from, likes to believe that Jordan was circled by wolves at his makeshift campsite, valiantly fought them off, and then was eaten. That's just something I think that brings her comfort. Certainly all the evidence points to the contrary. I spent a lot of time learning about Jordan Grider. I became very, very interested in his story. It stands out from many of the others in the book in the sense that Jordan wanted to come and spend an entire winter in the BWCA off the Sioux Hustler Trail. And when I say off, I don't mean off in the sense of a campsite. I mean, he hiked in on it and then bushwhacked in. And he found a very remote site, not a pretty site. It's an alder swamp, essentially. And not a place that I would ever want to camp at any time of year. And Jordan wanted to spend a whole winter there. Believed that he made it 2 nights before he died. Again, likely from an injury, bleeding out, then being eaten by wolves after he had passed away. There was blood splattered where his hammock was, where he tried to live and spend this winter and do what he was going to do out there, which is largely get away from society. Jordan was a troubled soul, you could say, and trouble with addiction, alcohol. He had some criminal charges that would indicate a violent tendency. He was dyslexic and just didn't find a place in society, just like Billy Cameron from Tuscarora. He also was 29 years old when he died here near Ely. His last place that he stopped was Zups. He bought some beans, rice, some vodka, took those into the woods with him. Getting to learn about Jordan didn't necessarily make me feel more educated about how to do things, how to travel in the Boundary Waters, what I want to do here with my time on Earth. It was an interesting story. I went to New Mexico, as I said, and met his family to learn more about who this person is that we're looking at in this photo. I went to Kentucky and got to see where Jordan had squatted for 5 years on some land owned by Mennonites. I went and talked with the people who let Jordan pitch his hammock on their cow pasture. Time after time, he was just a troubled young man, and brought him to the Boundary Waters. He's hiking the Appalachian Trail here in this photo, and that's where he met someone similar to me who said, "There's this place called the Boundary Waters. You got to go. Jordan, you seem like the kind of guy that could really do it up there. You could make it. You should go up there and check it out." So he did. He drove up here. His whole plan was to bushwhack in, not be seen, not have any human contact with anybody for the entire time when he arrived in October until he came out in May. That was his one and only plan. No human contact. Your local conservation officer, Sean Williams for the DNR, I think Sean's still here in this district, led me into the campsite. He's one of the first people that found where Jordan had camped. They found 13 bones, is all of Jordan. The bones had just arrived to the Grider household in New Mexico just days before I returned and made it to his home. His parents hadn't opened the box yet because they were at a forensic lab in Texas being processed 2 years afterward. I originally had Jordan Grider opening the book and closing the book in the original manuscript that I submitted. And I think it was largely because I became so fascinated by him when my editor, Shannon from the Minnesota Historical Society Press, read the original manuscript. The feedback was, this is good. There's good content here. There's a lot about this guy, Jordan Grider, and he stands out from the others. He didn't come here to go canoeing. He didn't come here to try to celebrate the wilderness. He didn't know who Sigurd Olson was. He didn't care who Sigurd Olson was. He didn't want to learn about Ojibwe history of this area. He wanted to hide out and get away, and more even reclusive than a Chris McCandless type. Krakauer's book, Into the Wild, if you're familiar with that. He just had a different story. So we moved that. If you've read Last Entry Point, you'll notice that Grider no longer opens the book, and that it was perhaps my own fascination with him that the editors said, yeah, let's change some of this, Joe, which was the right move. I definitely am much happier with the book now than the original manuscript that was submitted. But I do want to read a section about Jordan Grider that is in the book. Despite the uncertainty of exactly how he died, most people, from law enforcement to some of Grider's family members, agree that his body was eaten by wolves. On occasion, wolves will go beyond chewing or crushing whatever it is they're eating and will, in fact, eat bones for calcium and other minerals. Ribs are a favorite, along with other small bones. Over a cup of coffee one afternoon, Seth Moore, a wildlife biologist who works near the PWCA, told me everything I'd ever need to know about the feeding habits of wolves. Moore is the director of biology and environment for the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, in northeastern Minnesota. He said that wolves typically eat almost everything of whatever it is they're consuming. They love deer and young moose, but anything with flesh and blood will suffice. They'll eat skin, Moore told me. They'll eat hair. They'll chew through the bones. You can find teeth and hooves, wolf scat. Moore has spent more than a decade studying wolves on the edge of the Boundary Waters and Lake Superior, including a massive undertaking with the federal government to transfer wolves from Minnesota and Ontario and Michigan mainland to Isle Royale National Park. Moore said wolves have an amazing ability to carry things, perhaps even a human skull, long distances. We've had wolves prey on moose, for example. Moore said sometimes they'll grab the GPS tracking collar. It's not biological material at all, and they'll just carry the collar for a mile and drop it off. Luckily, our tracking collars have GPS units so we can find them, but it's not associated with the moose carcass at all. They'll do the same thing with pelvises. They'll do the same thing with heads. You know, sometimes we'll find moose heads very far away from where the rest of the bones and the carcass was. For a human skull, I suspect they probably just hauled it off. Mention that because one of the 13 bones did not include Jordan Grider's skull. It's still out off the Sue Hustler Trail somewhere. So these are some of the things that I learned on this journey of Last Entry Point, that violent things happen in the Boundary Waters, that it's not just the place that's the great fishing, the beautiful campsites, the northern lights, these sunsets that you get to see from camp. It's that and these other things that happen. And that was really why I wanted to write Last Entry Point, not to scare people from coming to this place that I cherish and love so much, but to help educate people that these things happen. And if you're going to come and try to spend a winter on the edge of the Boundary Waters in a hammock with a 20-degree sleeping bag, and you've never been here and you don't know anything and you have no contacts here, that's a terrible, terrible idea. and that hopefully Jordan's story, if nothing else, this is me talking with his mother, Rebecca, outside their home in Moriarty, New Mexico, that hopefully Jordan's story can impact someone else, even if it's just one person who might think that that is a good idea. Rebecca was devastated, of course. It was an extremely emotional experience to be in their home and talking about Jordan. In fact, I had come from Minnesota to Moriarty, which is about an hour east of Albuquerque, meant a great deal to the family, but it certainly did not make it any easier. And it also opened the door for Rebecca to wanting to control, to an extent, the narrative of what I was going to write about her son. But they were a very gracious family. Search and rescue crews across BWCA, St. Louis, Lake, Cook counties. There's different branches of them. Hermantown, here, Virginia, the Gunflint, Grand Marais, Lake County, different units of search and rescue. As I've said, some of these photos are from Curtin Falls, a situation that got a lot of publicity this year, I think more than any other search and rescue or recovery mission, certainly in the 12 years that I've been living here on the edge of the wilderness. That for a number of factors, I think because it took 2 weeks to recover the bodies of Reese Grams, Jessica, 2 people who died in that situation, but also because St. Louis County Rescue Squad was sharing updates from the scene. That was a unique thing and a new part of recovery in the Boundary Waters. But there's been a lot of attention on what's been happening here in these woods and waters this year in 2024, more than at any other time. Here's a gentleman, maybe some people in the room know this guy, Rick Slatton. He's the captain of the St. Louis County Rescue Squad. He covers the Ely area. When people go missing on this side of the wilderness, which is a massive part of the BWCA, Rick is usually always there. He likes to go into the woods and be involved, not just communicating from Hermantown in the headquarters for the rescue squad. He prefers to be on the ground. That's how he leads. His father, Rick's father, is one of the founders of the St. Louis County Rescue Squad. And without question, they are the most advanced unit that responds to situations inside the Boundary Waters. St. Louis County Rescue Squad is elite, not just by Minnesota or BWCA standards, nationwide, because of their capabilities and what they need to do from the Iron Range, the Lake Superior, Duluth area, here, Ely, BWCA. This is an unbelievable territory with varying terrain. As Rick will frequently point out, it's an area the size of New Jersey that they cover, the rescue squad. Rick had a company with his wife, who's now passed away, called Woodstock. They traveled all over North America, Canada, US, giving presentations on how to do search and rescue. So to say they're an advanced elite unit is an understatement. Without Rick Slatton, this book, Last Entry Point, would be a fraction of what it is. I talked with Rick more than any other source, hours and hours. I talked with him. I met him in Hermantown at their headquarters. He showed me the equipment. We pored over maps, talked extensively about different things that the rescue squad does inside the Boundary Waters. Zoom calls, December and January. Rick, it's 10 o'clock at night. You've been out 12-hour day. Can I get you on Zoom to talk just to make sure I've got this right? Yeah, I'll do it. I cannot say enough thanks to Rick Slatton for helping me with this book. So all the search and rescue information that's inside of Last Entry Point has been confirmed with Rick that it is accurate and told the right way. So really appreciative to him, and be thankful here in Ely area in St. Louis County that you have people like Rick Slatton and Rescue Squad to fall on. They were the ones. Rick was there at Curtin Falls leading that operation recently, and when he came out the first time, he said, I've got about 80 messages. I've got 500 messages. 80 of them are from media. Did you give him my number? He said, I gave it to Kathy Werzer in Almanac, but that's it. And so he did an interview with me in Curtin Falls. Rick is very weary of the media because he doesn't like the sound bites that public radio and newspapers often have to rely on, which is, at most a 7-minute segment, and it's a quote and it gets taken out of context. So Rick prefers someone who allows the time to explain about a situation like Curtain Falls. That's one of the most advanced rescues that they've ever had to do, for example. So how do you sum that up in a 40-second soundbite? It can't be done. So Rick is weary of that, but it worked to communicate with him in a book format. This is Michael Valentini on the left. He's maybe the equivalent, if you want to put it in that context, of the Rick Slatton on the Gunflint Trail. He's been involved in search and rescue on the Gunflint for a long time. He's moving the town of Chisholm, where he's from. Maybe you know restaurant, the Supper Club Valentini's, if that rings a bell. That's him. That's his family. He's moving back there, but Michael has been involved in a lot of search and rescue operations, including the recent 9-year-old boy on Snipe Lake who needed to be rescued. And he also was a very helpful individual for me writing Last Entry Point. That's a tree that came down on June 18th on the Gunflint Trail. That's one of the units the rescue squad uses. St. Louis County Rescue Squad shows you the type of equipment that they have access to, much more than foot or trucks, a highly advanced unit. Fire is something that gives a lot of people concern when they're thinking about the Boundary Waters. If you have a wildfire coming down on you and you're on a camping trip, it's probably going to be the most terrifying thing that you've ever experienced. It doesn't happen often. Communication typically allows the Forest Service and other partners and outfitters and so forth to say, you're not going in there, there's closures in that area, wildfires can move fast, but usually people have an opportunity to either get out or not go into a situation. But I do talk about wildfires. I talk about the Ham Lake fire in the book, Pagami Creek. Have some very intense experiences that people share with me. A couple named Greg and Julie Welch from Michigan who were caught in the Pagami Creek fire, a very detailed recount of that as well. One of the stories in Last Entry Point that does not have the closure of even a situation like Jordan Grider, where there's a box of bones and 13 bones, is a gentleman named Lloyd Skelton, who went hiking on the Angleworm Trail off the Echo Trail and has never been found. He's still out there. Rick and the crew from St. Louis County Rescue found his pants, his wallet, keys, one of his socks, but no Lloyd Skelton. And they've been out with dogs. They've done numerous searches. Still now 7 years later, still have never been found. When I was giving a presentation in St. Paul for Last Entry Point recently, one of the people I spoke with for the book, Lisa Skelton, was able to get up and stand up. She was in attendance in the crowd that night. I'm so grateful to see her. And this was right as Reese Grams had been found the day before, who was one of the people from Curtain Falls. And Lisa got up and said, I know what those families have been going through at Curtain Falls, waiting for their loved one to be found, knowing they're out there in the Boundary Waters and waiting for that phone call of closure of some kind to come for me and my family. And the only difference between what Reese and his family and Jesse and his family, the only difference now is that I still feel that every day that I wake up. There wasn't a dry-eyed place. It was a very moving thing for her to get up and share that with us. And for me and for us to remember that when someone dies in the Boundary Waters, their family, their friends, the people who were on that trip, they feel this forever. They view the Boundary Waters in a way that if you don't have that type of connection, that we don't understand. And some of that comes through in Last Entry Point as you'll read the book. Here's a gentleman that is a bit of an opposite from the whole energy story and everything that's inside Last Entry Point. His name is Mark Zimmer. We know him as the Barefoot Paddler. My pal M. Baxley, who produces the Paddle Portage podcast with me. And I have met Mark by chance at Sawtooth Outfitters in Tofte years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago at this point. And Mark goes into the Boundary Waters in late April or May, and he comes out in October. And he just lives in there. He works construction in Wisconsin or Minnesota over the winter, earns some money, buys a bunch of wild rice. He does get some resupplies, he catches fish, forages. He's an expert at both of those things. And he does all this without shoes. He does not like to have shoes on. He thinks they make it more slippery. He just doesn't like shoes. It's just a thing with Mark. Fascinating individual, and someone who basically is the embodiment of what Jordan Grider wasn't. So you've got someone who comes up here from New Mexico with kind of a half wild idea. I'm going to spend the winter in the Boundary Waters in my hammock, and I'm just doing it. No, I don't need to research anything or know about stuff. I'm just doing this. It's a wild space, public land. Mark is just absolutely pinpoint on what he's doing at all times, completely present. So it's the juxtaposition of Jordan Grider's, oh my gosh, this place is so dangerous, maybe I shouldn't go, to Mark, who goes and loves it, talks to people on the portages, likes to take pictures, is outgoing, friendly, wants to engage with people, hear how their trip's going, talk about his own, maybe mention a good fishing spot. So Mark is a person who's in the book kind of to illustrate that we don't have to be terrified of the Boundary Waters. Let's still go. Let's just do it the right way. Baxi and I paddled out to Brule Lake in the Boundary Waters. We coordinated with Mark through his GPS to meet at the landing there near Brule so he wouldn't have to leave the wilderness. And he'd been out, this was in August, so he'd been in for many months at this point. This was 2022. And I brought a big steak along, a big, thick cut New York strip steak, and I cooked it for Mark over the fire and medium rare. And he'd just been eating fish and berries and things, wild rice at that point for months. And he just tore into that, no utensils. He held it and just, we just sort of watched him eat that steak. So you'll read a bit more about that too in the book. This is a gentleman named Mark Ham. He's from Duluth. He passed away this year already on Agnes. He's the third in addition to the Curtin Falls people who died. And I did a story about Mark. I went to Duluth and met with his family at their beautiful home in Duluth. And one of the things that was giving them trouble is that the media, they were starting to get onto let's cover death in the Boundary Waters. Let's do it. This is a story. People are going to click on this. WDIO, KBGR, Duluth Tribune, Star Tribune. So this was getting shared, reported on, and the Ham family was distraught because all the reporting was saying that Mark didn't have his life jacket on, presenting him as a careless, sort of negligent paddler, which the family vehemently disagreed with. Said, no, our dad was on a solo trip. He always wore his life jacket. And what we were told by Search and Rescue in the coroner was that he had his life jacket slung over his shoulder and he was at the campsite and he died and was found later, had a medical situation. He was wearing his life jacket. So I went and met him, learned about Mark, shared his story on Paddle Portage, and ran this photo about how Mark always wore his life jacket. Woke up the next morning and I was horrified because people on social media, Facebook, people had said, man, nice story and all, kid, but the guy's not wearing his life jacket. So, really kind of being dismissive, lost credibility. The focus of the story was gone. I messaged his daughter and said, I'm so sorry. Can you send me another photo? I just didn't even think about it at the time. I was just wanted to share your dad's story. And she said, no, Joe, what do you mean? It's all good. And if you can look in that picture right here, these two yellow things, it's an inflatable PFD. So Mark could pull it or it would inflate when it hit the water. She said, he is wearing it. It's Coast Guard DNR approved. No problem. So I got to then say to this naysayer on Facebook, thank you. And if you'll note Exhibit A, he is wearing a life jacket, and I'll express your condolences to the family. So there are things that we need to be careful about in terms of rushing to judgment on how somebody might die in the Boundary Waters. I learned that personally when I was reporting and writing Last Entry Point, that if we start to get into it, oh, that person was a fool, damn fool, why didn't they have their life jacket on? Let's wait till all the facts are in. Let's learn more about them. And let's talk about who they were and their lives, and not just statistics. We're talking about people here. And I think that's, one of the main reasons, and I hope that as you read Last Century Point, you realize that I'm trying to share stories about people. So Paddle Portage is a company where we started in January, and we are sharing stories about the Boundary Waters, Quetico, paddling North America, not just BWCA Quetico, but that's our core. So I would encourage you to check it out if you're interested in this type of storytelling and discussion. Our podcast covers it, as well as our digital magazine that comes out monthly. And it's a platform for sharing these types of stories. And I would definitely like to hear some stories from this group now, if possible. I can either take questions and or just open it up to hearing some of those from some of the people whose hands went up who said, yeah, I've been in a situation with BWCA that was pretty intense and memorable. So questions and or stories, open it up for that. Yeah, Jake. Jake, I think, has a story that's happening, that just happened here near Ely. Jake's an Ely resident, if you know him, and I was hoping that he would come and share some of this with the group here. And we've got just a couple minutes left, but tell us what you've experienced and a little bit about your story, getting out and helping someone.
Gotta make it quick. There's been a lot going on. So yeah, my name is Jake Way. Here and around with Boundary Waters. There's been several instances going on lately. The one we was just recently talking about with the solo guy on Agnes. My son and I went in to get the gear left behind by him, and bring it back to his family. So I got to get him as well. Mm-hmm. The most recent situation that we just kind of were dealing with a few days ago, there was a missing person on the Cedar Blackstone Trail, and it was a scary situation, and there I got to be involved. I was allowed to go in and help to search for him, and he's actually a friend of mine. I know his daughter real well. We're all mushers in the community, and so she's a local musher as well, and I know her dad, and he was missing in there, and we were searching for a while, and ended up getting found from the air from a Forest Service beaver, and they saw his arm reaching out of the bushes on the edge of the lake, and they could see his blue shirt and his arm waving. And then when everyone was just depressed, because that's the only word I can think of, but the area, a lot of bummer stories like that have happened this year already where they didn't have the best outcomes, and then we hear coming across the radio, we see a guy waving on the shore, like that's it. And so everyone's just like high-fiving each other, and everyone that could hear the radios were like, yes, because he's alive. He's we don't know his condition, but he's waving his arm down there, and then the plane was able to get into him and work their way towards shore. It was in kind of a flooded area, and got him pulled into the plane, and everything's all right. So I like to listen to stories. I like to hear stories. I like to tell stories as well. I think maybe Joe and I are kind of similar in that way. And so the patient, Richard, he asked me to tell his story for him, which I was not asking for. He asked me, and so that's coming out now. I don't know what's up, Ely. So.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. No, that's yeah. You're gonna write a summary of it on What's Up, Ely.
Be back Tuesday, girl.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Maybe. Thank you, Jay. And maybe time for one more, or how are we doing? On time.
Got time for one more question.
Sure.
What was something unexpected or surprising that you learned while writing the book that, I guess you didn't before?
Well, one thing that struck me as someone who really likes to go winter camping, ice fishing, recreating in the Boundary Waters in the winter is that aside from medical emergencies, almost no one dies in the Boundary Waters in the winter. So I asked Rick Slatton about that. Why is that? It seems like that'd be a dangerous time, people falling through. That it's a different type of person that goes into the Boundary Waters in the winter time, for one, more experienced, more comfortable when things do go wrong, oftentimes have a change of clothes, they have other people with them, they can get out and know how to deal with these types of situations. And also because it's generally safe to travel on the lakes there, and that that element of how do most people die in the Boundary Waters? Cold water, capsize, drowning. These are what tend to kill people more than anything in the BWC. As you'll read, I break it down about the types of how people die in the Boundary Waters. And winter is just not a time that search and rescue has to go pull bodies out, unless someone has a heart attack. That does happen, but primarily where I thought I'd set out and learn about hypothermia, and there's some of that in the book, but it's on the edge of the BWCA at the Gunflint, that most people die in May, October. Those are 2 months that are dangerous, as we saw already this year in May. But the 3 fatalities were all in May. So that was a thing that struck me, as winter is a safer time, actually, even though it gets this bad rap and it's so cold, you're gonna die out there type thing. That's not the reality of what happens. Yeah, thank you, Megan, for the question. I will be signing some books outside here, and then I'll be at the bookstore at Paragus, and Becky has her book, her book out there too, so check that out. And thank you for having me to Ely. I really appreciate it being here. Thank you.